When we draw something from a photo reference, the easiest way to draw it is to draw it the same size as our reference. So in drawing this side entrance in a now historic ex-convict settlement in Tasmania, if I were to draw this actual size, this section of the column is 45 millimeters, so I would draw it 45 millimeters. If I wanted my drawing to be half the size, then I'm changing the scale. I want my drawing to look the same. I want the proportions to be the same. I just want it smaller. So instead of 45 centimeters, I would make this column 22.5. And I would make the width half the width of what I see in the reference. And then at the end, I want the overall entrance to be half the height and the overall width of my drawing to be half the width. But going half size is going to get a little bit small. Double size actually is remarkably large. So let's go size and a half. So instead of this section being 45 centimeters, I will make it half again, which will make it about 67 centimeters. And of course, I need to take it half as wide again as what I see there. The good news is that when we change the scale, when we change the lengths, the relative lengths and widths of our architectural elements, the angles stay the same. So this angle will be the same, and this angle will be the same, and this curve will be the same, whether we're drawing it half size, size and a half, or double size. So let me now draw this, adjusting the scale to 1.5 times, and talk you through my thought processes. And if you find it helpful, please remember to hit the like button, leave me a comment, and if you haven't subscribed, why not? Let's start drawing. So in order to get a nice accurate start, I have drawn a line 67.5 millimeters long. So that's going to give me my starting line and my starting scale of 1 to 1.5. Now, the angles, the perspective angles that come off this corner stay the same regardless of the scale that we use. The angles don't change, so that's really helpful to know. So I can continue now drawing the way I would normally draw this, getting the angles established, and then working out the width by using the detail and the shapes, the basic detail and the shapes that I have on this wall. But firstly, I, as you can see, just check and double check that angle because I don't want to get it wrong. So I'm looking at this reference. So instead of on a 1-to-1 drawing the width of this squared column on the end, the same width, I'm wanting to make it 1.5 times as wide as in my reference. So I'm looking first to see how it is in my reference, and then I'm using that to position my line. As the drawing expands, I can actually use what I've drawn to help me work out the scale of what I have to draw. But at the start, with these very first elements being drawn, I really have to pay attention to my reference and get the proportions right. The ratio of the height to the width of my drawing should be the same as in the reference. So now I commit to this column on the other side. At the end, we'll do a bit of measuring and see how close I came with these estimations in increasing the scale. And I'm using the basic shapes, working at getting them correct. Now, you're watching me draw this 1.25 times my actual drawing speed. So it's only slightly faster than I drew it in. At the very end, there's some hatching, which I've sped up very quickly because it's a bit time consuming and it's not strictly relevant to what we're doing. After that, I outline what I think is the way ahead for improving ability to change the scale and keep everything in proportion. A bit of a strategy for how to go forward. So if keeping proportions correct if changing various parts of the drawing to different scales is a problem for you, make sure you don't miss that at the end of the drawing part. Now comes positioning this hatchway. This is or was a convict settlement, so I dare say this was a secure entrance, and this was where things could be passed safely. Now that top line is way out. It should be a lot more horizontal than I've drawn it. And while I could sense that it wasn't quite right, I do make a few adjustments later, and the line under it is just as bad. And I felt that that line was a better angle, and it just served to highlight how out of line, out of kilter, the top lines were. Always better though to switch to doing what is more accurate and then work out how you'll adjust the less accurate parts. And you can see me trying to reduce the impact visually of those wrong lines. And next time I do a scene such as this, I'll work a little bit harder before I commit that line on the paper. However, working on the rest of this as well, so where to go from here. The order in which we do things is often important because we can have, if you like, more support when we follow one path of the drawing than a different one. So I'm going to go up and do these top sections. And again, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the proportions above the corners. It's not quite square, it's a little bit rectangular. So I want to capture that. And then there's a flat decorative pyramid on top. And again, I want to get these perspective angles more correct than the ones I got for that opening. Now, I don't want to make these too high or too low because that triangular pediment shape that sits between them won't look right if I don't get the proportions of the sides correct. And what I'm doing now is I'm looking to see how high up does it come. That point, how far up does it come above the sides in my reference, and therefore where will that spot be? And you might have noticed I placed a dot just to help me then put those lines where I'm wanting to put them. And now I do the same process on the other side, but before I can position that far column, I decide to go across with this doorway because again, I can look at what's in the reference for the widths and think I want 1.5 times that for this setback door post. And then I have the actual setback door where we have a lot of darkness from both the colour of the door and the shade that's on it. And now we have the depth of the wall, the thickness of the wall, and then we have the actual rest of the wall. So not losing track of what vertical line we're drawing is important. And all the time I'm glancing at my reference thinking I want this to be 1.5 times as wide as it is in the reference. I've already worked out the vertical distances, and so I just have to match them up. And that's what I mean when I say many parts become much faster to draw as we progress through the drawing, because we can measure them very quickly and easily off what we've already drawn and from what we've already drawn. And that's why it really is important to go slowly and as accurately as we can for those very first shapes that we draw. And now I do the same thing here. Just watching me do this now, I don't know how I haven't actually taken that one quite far enough up. I was thinking that it isn't quite as high as the one on the side, but it should have been a bit higher than what I've drawn. That's something to remember for next time. So just drawing the three-dimensionality here, and I decide to put some hatching in just for the doorway so that I keep track of what's what. Nothing's worse than we get all these spaces correct It can happen often with columns and spaces behind columns, and then we go later to put shadows on, and we put the shadow on a column rather than between the columns. Or we join up the spaces between windows rather than the windows themselves. So you probably all know that feeling. And now I'm doing some horizontal hatching for the shadow on the thickness of the wall here. Doing it horizontally so it stands out from the other. And I know I'm going to be doing more hatching over the top of all of this for the shade that's on this side of the building, and then more hatching for the shadow that's cast on the wall. If you don't know the difference between shade and shadow, I have a video on that. But in a nutshell, shade is when part of a building is in some sort of darkness because the light can't reach it. The object itself is blocking the light from reaching it. Shadow is where a part of the object actually casts a blockage, if you like, onto another part of the object or to a different object. So the shadow is actually on the side of the entranceway, which is against the direction of the sun, which is turned away from the direction of the sun. But the shadow is cast on that curving wall and on the ground. And shadow is darker than shade. And it really is true. And it's also a cooler colour if we're using colour. But that doesn't usually affect me. Shade has warm undertones. So with these now additional bits that just round off our drawing, I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at the widths and I'm trying to do 1.5 width of whatever I see in my reference. And now I'm very quickly doing this hatching just to give a bit of an effect. And then it's done. So let's just check a few larger proportions and see how closely we came to getting them right, changing the scale from 1 to 1.5. So from the top of this column down to this corner is 60 millimeters. So we want 90 millimeters. And I've got 88.5. So I'm happy enough about that. If we measure from here to here, we get 50. So we want 75. And we've got 72, I think. So we're slightly narrower, but this is what we're looking to do. If we change the scale of one part of our building, we want to change the scale of all the other parts of our building and of the overall size of our building to the same degree. What we don't want, though, is to draw one part maybe 1.5 times, then this part 1 3/4 times, and maybe another part that's over here only 3/4 of what we're seeing, so that we have different elements on different scales in the one scene. And if you have difficulty because either you change the scale without wanting to particularly, and so you don't feel you can control it, or if various parts of the building end up having a different scale and therefore end up being out of proportion to each other, I can suggest starting with simpler shapes, with less elements, and with elements that perhaps are simpler to draw, such as a structure such as this, because it's faster to improve when we're really drawing the key elements that will determine if we get our proportion correct, and not worrying with a lot of decoration that doesn't actually move us forward in our skill of changing the scale from our reference to our drawing, either larger or smaller. It doesn't matter. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I know that scale is a problem. People often leave a comment telling me. I hope this video has been helpful. But whatever scale you're drawing at or struggling with, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.